Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the morning show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, January 31st, 2020. Possibly, I guess, the last day of the impeachment trial. The question period wrapped up yesterday, and today is slated for the so-called votes on the question of whether or not they'll hear any more witnesses, or any witnesses at all, or admit any evidence at all, or simply move to dismissal. And the way it's shaping up seems to be that all the usual suspects who led us all to believe, did their best to lead us all to believe that there was some possibility that some Republicans would find their principles or whatever. I don't know why anyone was supposed to think that they had any. Yada, yada, you know the story. And then it would fall one vote short. I think they're now sitting with the commitments one way or another at a 50-50 tie, which I guess it depends. Maybe they'll just inquire of the Chief Justice exactly what he intends to do. There's no indication that this Chief Justice would have any interest in intervening. Chief Justices have, of course, in the past cast tie-breaking votes in impeachments, but those were those guys, and this is this guy. And, of course, there's always the possibility that the Chief Justice casts his vote as a no. He may very well say, ordinarily a tie, or, he may also rule, by the way, I suppose you can just rule, it's a tie vote. But in the case of parliamentary procedure, when there's a definite proposition on the floor, shall we allow more witnesses, 50-50, it's a tie vote, yes, but it's got an outcome. If no majority declares in favor of additional witnesses, there just won't be additional witnesses. You can just rule, the question is settled. You needed a majority in order to have witnesses. You don't have a majority. That's that. I don't even need to cast a deciding vote. That's a clever one. Look for that one. And of course, there's always the possibility, if the Chief Justice were to give any indication to Mitch McConnell, no, I will feel compelled to cast a vote, and as Chief Justice, I would probably vote in favor of allowing witnesses, then someone gets their arm twisted and the vote will come out 51-49 instead. And one of the people who is taking a free pass on this one will just have to have a tough campaign after all. And sorry, can't let you off the hook. Lamar Alexander, I guess, was the one who got the job of letting America down and explaining to us in a 15 tweet storm why he was making this decision. I have read through it, and it doesn't make any sense, and so there's really not a whole lot to glean from it. We can read through it, but it's internally inconsistent, not only as between the various of the 15 tweets in his thread, but at least one of the tweets that I noticed is just internally inconsistent with itself. So, what can he do? It was a tortured attempt at PR. It shouldn't be looked at as precedent or any sort of concurrence in a Supreme Court decision or anything like that. It is what it is. It's just supposed to make people go away, and I guess it will accomplish that. The real danger in all of this, of course, is not so much, I'm not so worried about the precedent that comes out of the Trump impeachment, but only because my real worry is there's no interest in this country in precedent at all anymore. It doesn't make any difference what the Trump impeachment decision is. It doesn't mean that all future presidents have dictatorial powers. If anything, it means that future Republican presidents will have dictatorial powers and future Democratic presidents will not. Even if there is a majority or even indeed a supermajority of Democrats in the Senate, they won't likely be able to be counted on, all of them across the board. For instance, if a Democrat were to try and glean something from this impeachment trial and decide, I do have dictatorial powers, I can do the exact same things as Donald Trump, Republicans will, of course, immediately see what's wrong with that, and probably enough Democrats, too. And it, of course, presupposes finding an elected Democrat who looks at these situations and says, yeah, we ought to try the exact same thing, even for good reasons. It really just, so far it hasn't happened, I'll say that. And it's not likely to happen in the future, and I don't know of any candidate who holds out any promise of that happening, and I don't know if it's a good thing, even if they did. So it's a complicated situation, is all we can say. But I believe the quote of the day for this situation, believe it or not, comes from the wisdom of our sage and prophet George Zimmerman, who once taught us, these assholes always get away. And that's the story of this impeachment, it appears. We'll wait and see, what happens. And it's always interesting to see what the procedure is like and to sort of get a sense for the floor and what's happening in this historic moment. And the roll call reporters will tell us who blew their nose and for how long, in what color handkerchief. And, we'll write it all down and study it judiciously, as we will, as they say. That's, that's kind of the way it goes. Another good thing to keep in mind today, another good quote to keep in mind, is the old reality-based community quote that was ended up getting attributed to Karl Rove, if I'm not mistaken. Well, we'll check in on that one. In case you didn't remember it, or you don't remember exactly how it went, or you just need a refresher, well, we'll take a look. What do we ought to check out what we're up to today, according to Bill in Portland, Maine, who warns all listeners that Daily Coast Radio is live now. By law, it says, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, must read my opening tweet. That's true. You can put the name of the whistleblower in there if you want. But it contains the word, oh my God, that's right, superb owl, which he's not allowed by law to say. What will he do? What will he do? That's true. You've created a legal conundrum for me here. By law, I do have to say it. And I did. All the letters were pronounced. See? But we already had our out in that one. I'm Super Bowl. That was thrilling, didn't we? We all had a good laugh out of that one. All right. Many things to catch up on, as I said. Let me check in here. I'll just look that up. That a reality-based community quote. It always serves as an interesting reminder to me of just how, it wasn't exactly prescient per se, but something near to it. I guess what I mean is, it is prescient in the sense that this is what Republicans are going to do from now on. But then again, do you really get credit for predicting the future if you get to just cheat and say, we'll just make this the future, or I'm going to cheat every time? Is not really a great prediction per se. All right, where was that original quote? Here we are. The phrase was attributed by journalist Ron Suskind. Did he say Suskind or Suskind? To an unnamed official in the George W. Bush administration. And I think most people now believe the quote is attributed, or was, or should have been attributed to Karl Rove. Rove apparently denies saying it. Which, I don't know whether that saves him any heartache or not, or whether he should just say, yeah, that's a good quote. That's me. So there may be no reason to deny it, unless it's just not true. Anyway, the aide said that guys like me, Ron Suskind, the reporter here, were in what we call the reality-based community. And it's funny how this is laid out. You would think everybody would say, well, I'm the reality-based community. You're the non-reality-based community. Republicans right now are voting to say, well, the reality-based community knows that it's no harm, no foul, that the president was perfectly within his rights. This doesn't rise to the level of impeachable crime. It may not even have happened if you're Mike Braun, right? And the community that lives outside reality is really the libtards who we're trying to own. And you guys think that this happened and it didn't. And if it did happen, that it was bad and it isn't, et cetera, et cetera. The gaslighting community is where we think they live. But this is a lot more, I don't know, honest, I suppose, unless this is not true either. Why bother believing this? Anyway, the reporter, I guess, or the guys like him who live in what they call, the Republicans call, the reality-based community, which he defined, the Republican here, as people who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. Right there, you're really in trouble. I mean, that's the liberal mindset right there. But in the old, maybe now archaic sense of liberal mindset, like, the liberal arts. You have a liberal arts education which teaches you to believe that solutions emerge from judicious study of discernible reality. Like, what else are you going to study, first of all? Yeah, certainly, even if you study non-reality or whatever, it certainly has to be discernible, right? You can't study it unless it's discernible. But, of course, current Republican, Trumpist, conservative, whatever you want to label it, anti-intellectualism, I suppose, tells you, no, not only that, why bother trying to discern anything? Just make it up and don't judiciously study anything. Studying is for nerds. F that. America hates nerds. Just go for it. Whatever you think you want it to be, that's what it is. Just tell people that it is that, and anything else is gaslighting, which is hilarious because, of course, you're the one gaslighting them, and that just makes your gaslighting that much more fun. To gaslight people into believing that they're the gaslighters. Anyway, so maybe we read it all the way through. I don't think I can without stopping. Okay, so there's people like you and me who believe that solutions emerge from judicious study of discernible reality, but that's not the way the world really works anymore. And we thought they were crazy, but now we see this is how the world really works. We're an empire now, and I don't know what that has to do with anything, but we're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously, as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. And there will, of course, be no point in studying what they do because you won't be able to discern solutions. No solutions for what they do will emerge from our judicious study of the discernible reality that they leave behind, because they don't believe in the discernible reality, and we'll make rules about how they behave. At the very least, we'll be able to say, well, we can predict with certainty that Republicans will behave this way based on their prior behavior. And maybe they will behave that way. Maybe they won't behave that way. They might shoot themselves in the foot for no real reason. They might be smooth operators. They might just lie about everything. I don't know. There's no predicting it. That's the real outcome of this. Not that there is precedent for all future presidents to have dictatorial powers, but that if Republicans are, control enough votes in the Senate, and a Republican that's helping them, they think, on the ballot is acting outside of his authority, well, that's going to be okay with us. If a Democrat were to do it, we will vote against that, whether we're in a minority or not. Is there really reason to think that there's precedent coming out of this? You know what? Don't even write it down. I mean, I just want to record for history that Trump's been impeached, but it's all ad hoc. It doesn't mean anything. If you fast forwarded immediately to the next Republican presidency and brought us, I guess, any Senate you want, whether they're in the minority, in the majority, what have you. As long as you need 2/3 to remove somebody, it won't matter very much. But if you had, I was going to say, if a Democratic president, if a Democrat were president tomorrow and called Ukraine and read the transcript, right? Okay, so we're going to actually read that transcript to the president of Ukraine right now, as if the Democrat who's now magically president was saying it all over again, as if this had never happened or whatever. And you ask the same people, the same Republicans, whether that was impeachable, it would be. Tomorrow. It wouldn't matter that the whole world watched them say the opposite yesterday. What would they care about that? What are you going to do? Go vote against them? You might in November, if you remember. But as long as it's not today, and even if it was today, they might just still say the same thing. And who knows? And, maybe one of the things that ought to frighten you about it is simple and straightforward, which is to say that the Republicans, as I tweeted just as I was getting on the air, the Republicans were about to decide today that nothing was wrong and that the people should decide in the next election what to do. They are also saying, yeah, we're going to have an election. Sure, it's going to go just the way you think it's going to go, and you'll vote and we'll count it up, and the person who gets the most votes, etc., or whatever. Anyway, the electoral college might decide it. Maybe this time Trump will win a majority of the popular vote, maybe not. But the people who are just about to say nothing happened here, nothing impeachable anyway, as long as our guy does it, also would like you to know that you should trust them to count the electoral vote and find out for us what the people think about the president's activities. And I guess I would leave it in my own hands, too, if I were them, right? So I guess that's all that's really going on here. And you should keep that in mind. By the way, I guess if there's any historical precedent at all that you can count on, and I'm not certain that there is anymore, it would seem to be Democrats applying their own precedents to themselves. So if we were to, as we look to be doing today, impeach the president, but then acquit him in the Senate vote, even though he stands accused of working to cheat in the next election, we will then allow the people who said it was okay to cheat in the next election to count the votes in the next election. And then after that, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I'm not exactly certain what they do with it or whether they need to engineer anything. But if something were to happen, obvious or otherwise, the only people in Washington who appear to operate predictably on precedent appear to be Democrats in Congress. And we have, I think, 3 times now in the last, how many elections? Bush's first election, Bush's second election, Obama, Trump. So 5 elections. 3 times in the last 5 elections, Democratic members of the House have risen to say there is something irregular about the electoral votes that we're about to count, and we should look into it. Something, I don't know exactly what it is, but someone should look into it. Someone should look into it. Many people are saying something that's now the new standard, except that there's no such thing as a standard. I know. It's very difficult to, it's like writing a time travel science fiction movie. It's very difficult to keep it internally consistent when there's supposed to be, one basic scientific principle that runs, or some principle that runs with at least science-like consistency all the way through. So it's difficult to know what to do if you travel back in time to a place where you were at that time. Will you see yourself or will you not? And can you interfere with yourself? Is there precedent or is there not precedent? Does it matter? And how do you account for it only mattering for certain people in your timeline? But the one thing that we've seen 3 times in the last 5 elections is that when there's a problem with or an objection raised by House Democrats to the electoral count, Senate Democrats sit mute and say, we really can't rock the boat, because what's most important is stability and consistency and predictability in American governance, whereas Republicans say that's not important at all. I guess it's a little bit like finding out that deficit hawk Republicans, once they capture government, say things like deficits don't matter. And that's disturbing to us because we will at that point, or we had by that point, reconfigured the Democratic Party to take into account in all of its decision-making, nominating, candidate nominations, platform building, etc. We will take away the deficit hawk plank from them with which they beat us over the head by being more fiscally responsible than them. We will discern reality, and a solution to the federal debt and federal deficit will emerge from our judicious study of reality, and we'll apply those principles and bring down the federal debt and bring down the federal deficit from year to year, only to have them say that stuff doesn't matter and explode it when they get it. That's probably the best example of how it works in practice. And I don't believe we've actually learned anything from that, to tell you the truth. That's weird. Anyway, bad news. So let's see. I guess there are closing arguments that we expect to see today. I don't know what they'll be like. I imagine there'll be an awful lot like they have been in the last couple of days, and lopsided at that. I will say this. I do continue to marvel that Republicans or the president's defense team continues to allow Pam Bondi a chance to speak. I'm not really sure why they feel the need to do that. They might just be saying to themselves, the outcome is predetermined. It doesn't really matter how good of a job or how bad of a job we do. But they do seem somewhat interested in doing as good a job as they can, and that's why they keep putting Philbin up there. And he seems to be, the most businesslike in terms of getting. He has his ludicrous moments too. But like Pam Bondi is a disaster. She's just by miles the worst one that they've got. And just in terms of presentation, I think I've now seen 3 clips of her answering questions that have been outrageous. Just not the content of the answer, but her inability to get the answer out. There was, I don't even remember what the first one was, but it was just totally ineffectual. The one we saw the other day and shared, but we didn't play on the air, is her stumbling through her speech, and she's like, it's as if she has cue cards, but there's only one word per card. She had to keep turning the page. She got lost in her notes trying to come up with her cockamamie Hunter Biden story about how much money he was, supposedly crookedly stealing from Ukraine. And she couldn't find the number. It was a mess. And then she did one yesterday. And this one, I think did I put this one aside in Pocket? If I didn't, I really should. Because, I don't know. Maybe you've already seen this one. Oh yeah, I think it did. Right. There's, let's see. The one I had from yesterday is the one that Aaron Rupar had said SNL couldn't do anything with this. It's already a parody. That's, I think, the one of her actually not being able to find her place in her notes. Maybe I should play that one and just revel in that one once again. I think we could just bring that up, right? Is the sound up on this thing?
Remained on the board.
Hunter Biden, of course.
Until April of 2019. We also know that
that's it. That's insanity. It's under 30 seconds. It's almost all silent. It's kind of embarrassing to play on the air. And did you hear the pages turning? She's not looking up. Just in terms of like the public speaking course that you're supposed to take in college or whatever, or high school. And you fail that. You got to look up. She can't keep her hands off her hair either. She probably just should have tied that back, because she's looking down at the paper and, she's got long hair. It's falling down in front of her every time. But that's not what's preventing her from reading the pages. She just doesn't know what page she's supposed to be on. And I think what did she eventually say in all of that? I actually don't remember.
Remained on
the board until April of 2019. That's what this is supposed to get to. And her whole job has been doing the Hunter Biden story, right? So why not just be familiar with these facts off the top of your head without the notes? April of 2019. So it took her 30 seconds to say, we know that Hunter Biden remained on the board until April of 2019. How is that not a fact at your command if your job is the Hunter Biden bashing story? I don't know, but it wasn't. And let me see. Where can I find let me do this one long story short. yesterday's clip that I saw, and it may have been from the same day, I don't know, but she was winding up, to deliver the knockout punch in the Hunter Biden story. And the thing, what she did was she's describing how, Hunter Biden, he has no experience in Ukraine. He doesn't speak the language. He doesn't know anything about gas and oil drilling. What's he doing? Why is he earning this much money? That's supposed to be the outrage. And then she goes on to say, well, he didn't even go to Ukraine more than once or twice. He went to a board meeting or two. One of them was in Monaco. He went to a board meeting in Monaco. And then he went on a fishing trip to Norway with Joe Biden's family. And I don't know whether she meant to say that the supposedly corrupt oligarch who runs Burisma, who owns Burisma, whose family business, I guess it's a privately owned. But this, at the head of Burisma, did he go fishing with Joe Biden's family in Norway, or was she serious? Because she was sputtering with outrage as if that was what she meant to say. But what she did say essentially was that it was Hunter Biden who outrageously went on a fishing trip with Joe Biden's family in Norway. Except, of course, Hunter Biden is in Joe Biden's family, and for a father and son to go fishing, for them to go fishing in Norway isn't necessarily all that commonplace, I guess, but there's fish there, so I don't know what they were all doing. Maybe they were all already in Norway. I don't really know. They were looking for a Norwegian blue parrot, perhaps, and they decided to go fishing. I don't know what the outrage was supposed to be. Which brings me to another question, by the way. Do you know, we've all been walking around saying it's horrible for Hunter Biden, or at least questionable for Hunter Biden to have been on the board of this corrupt company, Burisma. It's corrupt. Everyone knows it's corrupt. Gee, that's one of her lines. Everyone knows it's corrupt. You just have to read a thing that says that they're corrupt. Does anybody know offhand what Burisma did? Not can you look it up, not can you Google it, but do you know? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So Pam Bondi and her questions or the answers that she gave were horrific. I don't know how many times she spoke, and maybe there were some, I doubt whether there were any brilliant examples of her oratory skills, but perhaps there were some that were less disastrous. I'm not really sure. I did notice yesterday during the early hours of the question period that Ted Cruz put together another, zinger question, what he thought was setting up the president's counsel for a zinger against Democrats or what. I'm not really sure. I can't remember what the question is. It doesn't matter. But this would, I don't know, I guess this would have been about 1:30, 2 o'clock that he submitted his question. I just happened to be watching at that point and listening to his stupid voice say that he was sending a question to the desk. And then they read it, and it was like, great, Another stupid one that doesn't really do anything, but I guess is supposed to be a real gotcha. But it's directed, at least this time, to the president's counsel. So it's a big, lob of a pitch, a big fat softball that they're supposed to pound over the fence. And I'm curious. I don't remember the question, so I don't know whether it was aimed at Hunter Biden, and so he should have known that this was going to be the case, or whether this was a rare off-Hunter Biden appearance for Pam Bondi, but she answered his question. And I was just curious. This is where we miss having lots of good camera angles in the Senate and coverage of the senators as they as they sit for the trial, because I'll bet anything that Cruz's face just fell when he saw his brilliant gotcha question was going to be answered by Pam Bondi. When she got up to answer the question, I assume that he was just like, what a waste of time. I had the perfect gotcha, and then we're going to have Bondi answer it. And she's going to get up there and go, Russell, I need some papers to Russell. I am Pam Bondi, and I am a attorney. I am a attorney. Here to argue. Hi. So thanks a lot for that one. That was really helpful. I wondered whether that struck a nerve with Ted Cruz, or maybe he doesn't care at this point. Anyway, that seemed to be her major job, was launching the Burisma attack, which was kind of I just can't believe they're still doing it at this point. But do you know offhand what Burisma did? I guess I'm prepared to take Republicans and everybody else at their word that Burisma was involved in some corruption, because it's not hard to believe that a company operating in the natural gas sector in Ukraine, which is headed by someone who's spectacularly wealthy, is probably involved in some corruption. One thing President Trump, if you want to call him that, is mostly correct about is that there has been a lot of corruption in Ukraine. And I don't know. I don't think we're going to get around that one. But I guess what's really what strikes me is that I hadn't looked much into it, and maybe nobody had. And it struck me most when I saw Pam Bondi's answer to something. Which one it was? And I think it might have been actually, in this answer that she gives in which she accuses Hunter Biden of fishing with his father. Let's just listen to her doing that. But then she also she just kind of yells and sputters about how corrupt Burisma is at the end, without ever saying that, what they did, and we're all just supposed to know. And I was just wondering how many people did know.
No experience in the Ukraine, doesn't speak the language, and we clearly know that he had a very fancy job description, and he did none of those things. He attended 1 or 2 board meetings.
I'll pause it here just before she gets to the fishing trip thing, because as I understand it, by the way, that accusation, we don't know what he did, he's got no experience, he doesn't speak the language, et cetera, et cetera. I was told the other day, although I haven't bothered to look up whether it was true. Who cares whether it's true? What's the difference? We live in a reality-based community, and I'm quitting it. But the word was that Pam Bondi had taken on a lobbying job in between her job, believe it or not, as Attorney General of Florida, although maybe you can believe it when you think about Florida. But that in between her job as Attorney General of Florida and whatever this job is, she had taken on some work, very high-paying work. Might even pay better than what Hunter Biden was getting. I don't know. But on behalf of the government of Qatar. And what does she know about the government of Qatar? Or does she speak the language? Does she have any expertise in how they govern themselves? No, probably not. But they were buying access, just as people accuse Burisma of having done with Hunter Biden. But she feels comfortable lobbing these allegations anyway, because who effing cares? Do what you want to do. There's no rules about anything, and this won't set precedent for anything, because there's no such thing as precedent anymore. Oh, you mean it's bad for inexperienced people who just happen to have a name that they can trade on? Oh, granted, it's her name. That's one thing that she has over Hunter Biden, I guess. But if that's bad, then I don't know. then something. Well, you're doing it. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. I can prove it definitively. You're proving something else, and the Constitution doesn't say anything, or whatever. Good question here, Bob will speak. Trial of truth, not just culture of truth. Asking, what language does Pam Bondi speak? Because I am not sure if that's English. But now she goes on, of course, to accuse Hunter Biden of going fishing with Joe.
One in Monaco, and then he went on a fishing trip with Joe Biden's family in Norway. The entire time, Joe Biden knows that this oligarch is corrupt. Everyone knows that. There are news reports everywhere. No one will dispute that. In fact, it raised eyebrows worldwide.
So there you have it. That's the proof we have that Burisma is corrupt. We'll play it again if I have it in the right place.
Everyone knows that. There are news reports everywhere.
Everyone knows what?
There are news reports. Everyone knows that. There are news is corrupt. Everyone knows that.
It's
there
corrupt.
are news
Everyone
reports
knows it.
everywhere.
There's news reports
No
everywhere.
one will dispute that.
No one will dispute it. I'll dispute it just for fun. What did Burisma do? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you know. I did look it up. And I'm still not sure. To be honest, I have one source that says they were accused of being involved in money laundering. And I mean, they could be involved in both. And another that accused, the accusation was that the main corruption from this other source was that this oligarch, whose name, I don't even know the guy's name. I don't know. It's available. You can look it up. Maybe I will get around to it. Maybe I'll show you one of the clips I had and it'll be in there. Who cares? His name is Joe Oligarch. And the word is he was like minister for environmental protection or whatever in Ukraine. And so it was up to him. His job was issuing, among other things, issuing natural gas drilling permits. And then he got the brilliant idea that what if I issued natural gas drilling permits to myself and started a natural gas company while I was the person in control of permitting natural gas drilling? I could probably make a fortune by giving myself the rights to drill for natural gas and denying it to other people, I guess. Some other people will get to drill. I don't take them all. But I'll give myself enough so that, then I'll start drilling it and I'll sell it for inflated prices and I'll also skim off we assume that all of this is happening. I don't know whether it is or not. But, in our country, in our system, you're not supposed to be both the official who grants those permits and the person to whom the permits are granted because conflict of interest. I assume that in the Ukrainian system, you're also not supposed to do that. But they weren't particularly good at enforcing it. And, of course, he could have been relying on precedent because they still believe, I guess, in the power of precedent because others before him have been accused of the same thing. Or if not exactly the same act, doing so as environmental minister or whatever the title was that he held. Doing it as prime minister or some other high official and saying, hey, environmental minister, I'd like you to do me a favor and give me one of those or 100 of those permits. It's happened before. So, what can I say? They love the value of precedent in the democratic Ukraine. Anyway, but they're not internally inconsistent either. It could be that, money laundering is something that he also did. Maybe he laundered the money that he was using to pay prosecutors to look the other way while he engaged in this terrible conflict of interest. Maybe the money he was earning was supplemented by dirty sources and he laundered it. I don't know, but that's the accusation. But it's never the same accusation twice, as far as I can tell. So I don't know what Burisma did. I'm not defending Burisma. They probably did it. But then I guess the question becomes, does that mean everybody at Burisma was dirty? Because that's clearly what Republicans want you to believe about it. And it's entirely possible that Joe Burisma is a money launderer and a thief and an exploiter of conflicts of interest, and that Hunter Biden is just an amiable chump that they had around that was, by most accounts, hiring any American, but particularly an American with a name, was about saying, wow, how could we really be thoroughly corrupt from top to bottom in this company when we have such fine, upstanding citizens as somebody you don't know, but whose name is Biden, and hint, hint, that's the Vice President of the United States. That's the theory of hitting Joe Biden with corruption charges based on the idea that Hunter must be corrupt because he worked for a company where the oligarch in charge is said to be corrupt. So I assume that's supposed to mean that everybody from top to bottom in Burisma is corrupt. And that's when I discovered, I thought, something relatively interesting, just in poking around, just trying to find out, so what's the charge on Burisma? I also ran into this information that we just don't talk about a great deal, I guess. Where did I get this? I screenshotted it. Yes, from NPR, some NPR story. So you can find the actual NPR story, I suppose, by Googling the text that I highlight, but I'll just show you the screen cap that I picked up. Burisma, I think this was an explainer from NPR. What did Burisma do exactly? Why are we worried about Burisma? Why is that in the news? NPR, tell me. And they'll tell you both sides. Burisma faced a money laundering investigation. That's where I found out of the money laundering. And questions over how it had obtained some of its licenses to drill for natural gas. I think they don't explain that, but I read it elsewhere, so now we know. That's the question. The question is, did you give it to yourself? In spring of 2014, the company appointed Hunter Biden and a former Polish president, Aleksander Kwasniewski, we'll give it that pronunciation, to its board. So Hunter Biden and Aleksander Kwasniewski, the former Polish president and the son of the then current Vice President of the United States. Now, 3 years later, it says, Burisma added Cofer Black, a former CIA official and foreign policy advisor to Mitt Romney's presidential campaign, to the board. And we don't talk a great deal about that. I don't think I've ever heard any mention in the course of, certainly in the course of the impeachment debates or the question and answer period or anything, that, Cofer Black, who's a Republican, was on the Burisma board. What's the story with his corruption and the people he's connected to? Because again, the story is, Hunter Biden must be corrupt because he works at Burisma. And if Hunter Biden is corrupt, then Joe Biden is corrupt. Although they did construct a little bit of a story there. Well, Joe Biden was trying to protect Hunter from being connected to the corruption by having them fire the prosecutor who was not, in fact, but they say was, looking into Burisma, which is a terrible plan, by the way, because probably the next prosecutor, if it's that corrupt, will also be looking at the corruption. But I guess the idea was supposed to be, and don't hire another one who's going to look at Burisma either, because then we'll cut off the rest of the money. But nobody has ever alleged that he said that, by the way. I mean, that would just be crazy. It wouldn't be reality-based. We can't say that. So nobody ever made that accusation. I guess we're just supposed to understand that. But I was curious that it was not a topic of discussion, for instance, that one of the jurors in this case, a sitting senator, had recently run for president and had as one of his chief foreign policy advisors this person who had decided, I too will sit on the board of Burisma, which obviously means they're thoroughly corrupt. And a person that would hire such a corrupt person as their advisor might also be corrupt. Of course, it happened in the opposite chronology. He was an advisor to Mitt Romney first, and then added to the Burisma board in 2017. But what the hell do facts mean? Who cares about that? Of course, on the other hand, Mitt Romney has been one of the more open among the Republican senators, allegedly. We'll see how he votes, and we'll see whether it matters. He's been allegedly open to, well, maybe we'll have some witnesses. And maybe he did do something wrong, and I don't know. But he's never hinted that he would remove anybody. And to the extent that Burisma matters, maybe we should be talking about the fact that there's this connection. It's an unfair connection, but so is the Joe Biden-Hunter Biden connection. What I found even more interesting than that, and I looked up who is Cofer Black, in case you didn't know. I didn't. I looked at Wikipedia, because they're always correct. Anyway, I found out there that Cofer Black, was also formerly a director of Blackwater, which is not one of our favorite companies, and of course is run, or was run when it was Blackwater, and now it's something else, and I guess it's still run by him. So forget all of that. But I went through like 3 name changes. It didn't become ZXI, and then it became like Academy Services, like with an I at the end instead of a Y. I don't know. They have some kooky name now. Anyway, that's Eric Prince's company, the mercenary company. Prince, of course, has left his prints all over the Mueller investigation and report, involved in the Seychelles meeting, involved in all sorts of other shadow governmental, quasi-governmental operations, just like Rudy Giuliani has been involved in, and more on that later. That was a revelatory moment in yesterday's proceedings about Rudy. But Eric Prince is all over that, and of course the brother of Education Secretary, look, my tweet came out misspelled, Education Secret, which kind of she is, Betsy DeVos. And, maybe they're all corrupt, and they are, but maybe this is the reason, an additional reason. But then I found out more. I thought, okay, that's weird about Cofer Black. Like, that's some interesting mix of companies to have been a director of. I mean, what a loser. This is like like the Donald Trump of corporate directors, Blackwater and Burisma, or maybe he does all his corruption in B companies, and then all the other ones he's honest in. But then I read this other very interesting thing, also in Wikipedia, about the circumstances, and who knows whether this is true. Maybe he edited this section so it would look better. But the section of his private sector work, and his public sector work is pretty interesting too. He was head of counterterrorism at the CIA. He was more than just a CIA official. He was a big deal CIA official. And it says here, though, in his private sector years, from 2005 to 2008, Black was vice chairman, not just on the board, but vice chairman of Blackwater USA. Here we are, later renamed Blackwater Worldwide, then ZXE, and finally Academy. That is right, with an I at the end. Anyway, this is, of course, the U.S.-based private security firm, which is the biggest of the State Department's 3 private security contractors. Now, this line at the end of this paragraph is what intrigued me. It says, Black resigned in 2008, reportedly after learning of illegal payments to Iraqi officials. Now, it's sourced, so I guess we could look that up and find out what it's supposed to mean. But I guess the theory here, maybe before we go any further, we should look it up. We'll just do this live on the air. So Cofer Black Wikipedia entry, and this way I can follow the link and see where it comes from, because it sounds pretty good, right? You are saying that as soon as you discovered, or subsequent to your discovery of corruption at Blackwater, you resigned from the company. I realize you have to be careful about how you say it. It may mean, if I say it the wrong way, I don't mean to say, well, he resigned over corruption at the company. Not that it was his corruption and he resigned in order to spare the company the embarrassment of his corruption, but rather it sounds like he resigned because he didn't want to serve on the board of a corrupt company. Illegal payments to Iraqi officials. And it's sourced here to a New York Times article in November 10th, 2009. Blackwater said to approve Iraqi payoffs after shootings. So all Blackwater legal problems in Iraq arise from them shooting people. And I guess here, this is interesting. He didn't resign over them murdering people. He resigned over Blackwater, it looks like, allegedly trying to pay off Iraqi officials to either let them off the hook or something after they shot a bunch of people. Oh, well, if you made illegal payments, I'm leaving. The murders, I'm a CIA guy. They don't bother me too much. The payments, though, that's beyond the pale. Anyway, the argument is supposed to be here that Cofer Black is the straight guy here. And when he finds out that it says here, we'll read the first paragraph just for a second. Top executives at Blackwater Worldwide authorized secret payments of about $1 million to Iraqi officials that were intended to silence their criticism and buy their support after a September 2007 episode in which Blackwater security guards fatally shot 17 Iraqi civilians in Baghdad, according to former company officials. So it's the big murder that you heard all about. And I guess paying money to Iraqi officials was supposed to say, keep them quiet and not agitate against Blackwater in Iraq, which I'm not certain that helps anything, but I guess they thought it did. There's another paragraph down here that says, Blackwater's strategy of buying off the government officials, which would have been illegal under American law, and not if Donald Trump has anything to do with it, he wants to repeal that law, created a deep rift inside the company, according to former executives. They said that Cofer Black, who was then the company's vice chairman and a former top CIA and State Department official, learned of the plan from another Blackwater manager while he was in Baghdad discussing compensation for families of the shooting victims with United States Embassy officials. Alarmed about the secret payments, he made a whistleblower report. No, Mr. Black cut short his talks and left Iraq. Soon after returning to the United States, he confronted Eric Prince, the company's chairman and founder, who did not dispute there was a bribery plan, according to a former Blackwater executive familiar with the meeting. Mr. Black resigned the following year. I don't know when did it happen? Was it in like December and he resigned the following year, or did it happen in April? And I may resign soon. I'm not really sure. Anyway, the point is that the report here in Wikipedia and gleaned from New York Times is supposed to tell you that Cofer Black is a guy who doesn't stand for corruption. And when he's sitting pretty and in a high-paying job on the board and as vice chairman of the board at that of Blackwater, when he spots corruption, he is out the door. If that's something we're to believe about Cofer Black, and, there's no reason to believe that anybody who's in the CIA is a hero all the time. Whatever. Sometimes people do the right thing. Sometimes not. I don't know. Sometimes they lie about themselves. But if Cofer Black runs the other direction, even when he's getting paid handsomely, runs the other direction when he spots corruption, what is Cofer Black's participation? What was Cofer Black doing on the board of Burisma? What does Cofer Black's participation tell us about what's happening on the board at Burisma or company-wide in Burisma? Either he's a guy with integrity who runs the opposite way when he sees corporate corruption, or he's not. Or, I guess, whatever. There's no such thing as precedent. There's no such thing as law. No such thing as consistency. Some boards that are corrupt I run away from. Other boards that are corrupt I stay on. I don't know. Maybe we're not supposed to take any lesson from it. But I suppose that would make for an interesting question. You can't direct your questions to Mitt Romney. But I'd love to know what Mitt Romney thinks of Cofer Black. Of course, he'd say, I hardly know him. He was a coffee boy on my campaign. I had lots of foreign policy advisors, and, that's true. And he may or may not have real contact with them. It's just a formality. These guys write papers or have other people write papers, and they put their names on them. They give them to me. I read them. That's my position. I'm a smart guy running for president now because I read what these guys had to say. I am curious, though. In the course of the impeachment trial, it has been mentioned that, and I think by the president's counsel trying to score points, or maybe it was maybe it was Republican senators talking at the microphones during breaks, but they did try to score a few points by pointing out, by the way, Democrats today can't shut up about telling you about what a danger Russia is, and Russia is our biggest enemy, and we have to look out for Russia, and Russia's meddling and everything. Who told you during the 2012 campaign that Russia was our greatest geopolitical foe? Mitt Romney did. The Republican candidate did. And you all laughed at him. And I admit that we all did. That was not so smart, although it did seem a little weird and a little out of left field to be insisting that in the face of, year after year of waving red flags about international terrorism, as opposed to Russia as the greatest geopolitical foe. But they were right about that, or certainly arguably right about it. And sorry, there were other reasons why we didn't want you to be president, like you laughing about Benghazi, but and being, a a locust capitalist. But now I was just sort of curious. I don't think this is the case because Cofer Black's portfolio wasn't, Russia per se, but he was counterterrorism at the CIA. But certainly having been at the CIA, you would ordinarily expect that he would be Russia suspicious generally. I'm curious whether, who gave Mitt Romney the line about Russia being our greatest geopolitical foe? Is Mitt Romney the foreign policy genius and visionary behind it himself? Could be. Not an idiot. But more likely somebody handed it to him. Probably another advisor, somebody brought on specifically for Russia. But it would be curious if it were to turn out that, Cofer Black, the guy who got it right, who told Mitt Romney that it was Russia who was our greatest geopolitical foe, despite all the laughing about that from Democrats. And by the way, he was right there, and he's right now being on the board of Burisma, which means that there's no corruption at Burisma because, as we know, he signals very loudly when he sees corruption at companies on which he's serving in the board by resigning. Unless he just happened to have done that because he didn't like Eric Prince. I don't know. But it'd be worth pointing out at this point. Maybe at this point nothing's worth pointing out. But it'd be worth having pointed out at some point. Rhetorically, maybe you could use it over the weekend. If you go to a Superb Owl party and there's, God help you if you're just in a MAGA Superb Owl party. I can't imagine any of you putting yourselves in that situation. So I won't even discuss it. But if you need to discuss the topic of Burisma somehow with somebody, you should bring that one up. I also found another nugget that was of some interest with respect to Cofer Black and Burisma. And as I get the music queued up here, I can scroll and find it. I don't know that this is the case, but I actually found this, I think, on, maybe it wasn't the Burisma website, but it was a Ukrainian website repeating PR for Burisma, and they were announcing Cofer Black's joining the company, and they said, according to public media reporting, Ambassador Black was a top contender for the position of director of the CIA under Donald Trump. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. So that was kind of interesting, wasn't it? I had never heard that, or it had never registered with me. Nor had I ever heard him referred to as Ambassador Black, because really, honestly, what do I know about Cofer Black? Nothing. I just happened to come across his name in this article about Burisma at first, and it struck me, I think I've heard the name before, but I don't know why. Anyway, his name is Joseph Cofer Black, and he goes by Cofer. I don't know why. Maybe Joe Black is too. Or maybe the movie screwed it up for him. I don't know. It's just too commonplace. People love their weird names, and who can blame you? You want to be Googleable in life. You really don't. You want to be anonymous. But anyway, ambassador. So I guess he. What kind of ambassador was he? It says here, Joseph Cofer Black, a former director of the CIA's Counterterrorist Center and ambassador at large for counterterrorism. So he wasn't an ambassador to a country. He was one of those, you're a cultural ambassador for counterterrorism. Well, anyway, he recently joined the board at Burisma Group. This would be from 2017. Ambassador Black resigned from public service in 2005 after a 30-year career and is considered a leading expert and significant figure on U.S. and international security issues. He served in the administration of President George W. Bush and also served as a senior advisor on international affairs for the U.S. presidential candidate Mitt Romney that we discovered earlier. And then it goes on to tell me the new part. According to public media reporting, he was at some point a top contender for the position of director of CIA. And I don't know whether they meant necessarily CIA director or director of national intelligence or either or both or neither. Could be a lie, just puffing him up so that he looks better. This is, of course, a PR piece by Burisma for Burisma. And, so it may or may not be true. But how interesting would that be? Little twists and turns in the story could really have made a big difference, although maybe not. I mean, if, let's say, Cofer Black if he had been named CIA director at that point, then I suppose since he joined Burisma's board in 2017, it is unlikely that if he were a CIA director, he ever would have joined Burisma, and so you couldn't say. I was about to say, how different would the Hunter Biden story be right now if Cofer Black was director of the CIA at the moment and perhaps had joined the board in anticipation of not serving in the Trump administration and then been surprised to become CIA director later on in the administration when the original directors are fired. How many have we fired any CIA directors, or has always been, is Haspel his one and only? I can't remember. They go in and out here so rapidly, and there's so many of them that leave the administration. But wouldn't that have been something? To go to Burisma, be named CIA director, and say, all right, I was only here for a month or two, I got to leave. I've been named CIA director back in the United States. Got to take that job. Go. And then here we are in the middle of this nonsense. And Trump is telling everybody Hunter Biden is corrupt because Burisma. And Joe Biden is corrupt because he tried to cover up the Burisma thing. But everyone knows that everyone attached to Burisma is corrupt. And then somebody says, your CIA director just left Burisma. But in the Trump administration, you just say, no, he didn't. So there you go. That didn't happen. Or, yeah, he left because of the corruption. Well, he left because you named him CIA director. And the corruption, which he doesn't like, which we know to be the case because look what he did with Blackwater. That might work. I don't know. Just thought I would point that out. Not going to change anything now. Just going to make you madder. But maybe it'll give you something to yell about at a Superb Owl party or whatever kind of party you might be going to this weekend. Canadians, do you watch the Superb Owl or do you wait for the Canadian Football League Championship, which is called the, is it the Grey Cup? Is that right? Do I remember that correctly? Is that actually, or am I making that up? I don't know. I bring up the Canadians because I just saw Brian Monroe tweeting here. Senator Alexander, he says, has just confirmed that nothing is illegal if it is done by a Republican president. That's true. Perhaps you might consider having another Benghazi inquiry on your way out the door while you're at it. Yeah, sure. Why not? He probably will do that. By the way, everyone was focusing on him, I guess, because he's retiring and not running for re-election, and so he should supposedly be free to follow his conscience. And what that means is I'm free to not do any work and do any hard stuff and listen to constituents yelling at me because they're angry that I betrayed Trump and the country. And I just like to retire in peace. So that's what he decided to do. Let's see. One or two other. Yes, as a matter of fact, Bruce, is it McFadden? What's your last name, Bruce? I'm sorry. Let's see if I got it right. I'm trying to remember. It's not in your handle, and you're now just Bruce McF. But is it? I think that I remember it correctly. But Bruce whose tweets as Bruce McF. That's all you really need to remember about him, right? You can find him that way. I don't care if you get the rest of my name right. Just get the handle on Twitter right so we can talk. And he says, what's he sending me? There you go. There's so often a deal to be made. Sending me the tweet of Christina Henderson. Christina Henderson. Oh, let's see. Running for D.C. Council at large, is she? Okay, well, what's she doing in the meantime? I don't know. Doesn't tell me. And so that means cool person who doesn't feel like they have to tell you what their job is in their Twitter bio. Christina Henderson says, vote for her. By the way, she's cool. She's running for D.C. Council. I don't know who she's running against. Yes, Lamar Alexander is retiring. However, he has one last bill he wants to get done. Higher Education Act reauthorization. This requires floor time. Prediction, he will not cross McConnell. That is a pretty good prediction, and it's a prediction, well, it's a prediction from yesterday. So not far in advance, but correct prediction, and probably a good explanation for what was going on. Maybe he was free to vote his conscience, but not if he wants to get this last thing done. Good point. Other couple of comments that have come in, and even though I just did them out of order, I'll do them in chronological order now. Let's see. Mighty OCD saying about Pam Bondi. I had said, well, at least she has her own name. She was Attorney General. She did get elected. I don't know if there was a Bondi before. If her father was Attorney General, that would explain things. But, right now I just look at it and say, well, Florida. That's why she's the Attorney General. He says Trump's name got her that job. She got her the job as, in Qatar? I guess you're probably right about that. If he hadn't plucked her from obscurity, it wouldn't have happened. That's probably true. And I don't know exactly how it worked out, but he probably, they looked around and they were looking for people in the Trump orbit. So yeah, you're right. That's a good point. She didn't get herself the Qatar job, but I assume that, for instance, I guess Trump could have named anybody. If Qatar says, who do you want us to give money to? Say, if it's as simple as that. We're going to hire some lobbyists. Who do you want us to pay off? He might have named anybody, including, I don't know, Barron for that matter, right? And they might have said in Qatar, well, I get where you're going with that, but I'm looking for somebody that's going to do us some good outside. Now, Pam Bondi is not a very good attorney, but saying she was Attorney General of Florida and is still close to Trump, that's pretty good. We need some kind of credential, so we'll take her. She got herself that credential, I think, although she got it in part using illegal contributions from Trump University, or rather the Trump Foundation, so that she would drop the, charges against the Trump University. We all remember that story. Other comment that came in, and this is an interesting and valuable observation on yesterday's proceedings, Jack Ox pointing out that Elizabeth Warren asks killer questions, and in this case, one in particular, zeroing in on Chief Justice Roberts, and he's forced to read it, as we know. And, I think I saw this question up on the screen when it was being answered in mid-afternoon, if I remember correctly. There's a link here to the alternate story on it. As I recall, Warren's killer question here, well, it'll be in here, won't it? I bet they'll quote it. Here it is. At a time when large majorities of Americans have lost faith in government, does the fact that the Chief Justice is presiding over an impeachment trial... Oh, I got to get some pop-ups out of the way. Like 30 of them. Hold on a second here. Go, alternate, get out of my face. At a time when large majorities have lost faith in government, does the fact that the Chief Justice is presiding over an impeachment trial, in which Republican senators have thus far refused to allow witnesses or evidence, contribute to the loss of legitimacy of the Chief Justice, the Supreme Court, and the Constitution? In other words, as our alternate writer, it's alternate rerunning. I didn't even know that this was the case. Rerunning Carrie Elleveld's piece from Daily Kos. Okay, dang, I guess I should be marking that one for inclusion instead of the alternate version. But, okay, well, I'm glad that we have that one. In other words, hey, we all know this is a sham trial. The American people know this is a sham trial. Any chance you'll do the right thing and protect the integrity of the court and your legacy by casting your vote for witnesses in the event of a 50-50 tie? And then Kapowie. She didn't write the Kapowie in there. Elizabeth Warren. Now that's Carrie. All right. Anyway, that's a good one. Although I will say this. I was like, oh, I feel uncomfortable for Justice Roberts, not because I like him, but because I'm an empathetic person. And, but it's a good question, and tough but fair. And, he's not going to cry about it. It's not going to change anything. But it's a good question to ask. I don't know who she asked it of, but I think I thought I saw it on the screen. So I guess Schiff was answering. This would have been around, if I remember when I saw it, through, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, perhaps, something like that. I was in the doctor's office. And they had the ABC coverage of it on. I was pleased by that. Anyway, that was a tough question. The Chief Justice didn't have to answer it, of course. He just has to sit there and listen to it. So I'm sure it bothered him a little bit, but, he got through it. But it's a good point. Let's see. Other things that I wanted to... there was something else that Schiff answered yesterday that I thought was pretty good. And I'm just going to scroll back down the Twitter timeline and pick highlights from there. There are a few things I've got tucked away in pocket and some other things to share with you. But most of the action was in the Twitter timeline yesterday. I didn't get as much time to read offline as I ordinarily do because of the aforesaid doctor's office visit. Oh, yeah, there was this one, too. I don't know, my offhand comment as I was thinking about Burisma and what I was learning about Cofer Black, et cetera, and just reflecting on Pam Bondi's line of attack. Well, what did Hunter Biden do for Burisma? What could he possibly have done? Not only was it hypocritical because what could she possibly do for Qatar, but it struck me there. What did Hunter Biden do for Burisma? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not sure what he could possibly have done. What did Donald Trump do for pediatric AIDS? Was my follow-up question. I mean, you all remember that story, right? And I attached David Farenthold's reporting of it. But remember, long story short here, was a pediatric AIDS benefit in New York in, I don't know, what, the 90s, I guess? Early 90s? Yeah. Fall of 1996. That's mid-90s. The Association to Benefit Children held a ribbon cutting in Manhattan for a new nursery school serving children with AIDS. The bold-faced names took seats up front. You remember where this story is going. There was then Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, former Mayor David Dinkins, TV stars Frank and Kathy Lee Gifford, who were major donors. And there was a seat saved for Stephen Fisher, a developer who had given generously to build the nursery. Then all of a sudden there was Donald Trump. And nobody knew he was coming, said Abigail Disney, another donor sitting on the dais. There's this kind of ruckus at the door, and I don't know what is going on. And in comes Donald Trump. He just gets up on the podium and sits down. Trump was not a major donor. He was not a donor, period. He'd never given $1 to the nursery or the Association to Benefit Children, according to Gretchen Buchenholz, the charity's executive director then and now. But he was sitting in Fisher's seat next to Giuliani. Frank Gifford turned to me and said, "Why is he here?" Buchenholz recalled recently. By then, the ceremony had begun. There was nothing to do, right? Everybody's just stunned into silence. Nothing we can do. Objection to the Electoral College count. We need a senator to make this objection so that we can have some debate on it. Ceremony began. There's nothing I can do. Just sing past it, she recalled Gifford telling her. So they warbled into the first song on the program, This Little Light of Mine, alongside Trump and a chorus of children with a photographer snapping photos and Trump looking for all the world like an honored donor to the cause. But you know the rest of the story. He never gave any money. He hung out there, got his picture taken so it looked like he was a big donor to pediatric AIDS and took off and didn't give any money afterwards either. And how disgusting is that? Well, so that's an all by itself disgusting Donald Trump story. But what did Hunter Biden do? What could he have done for Burisma in exchange for this thing of value? In this case, cash? I don't know. Nothing. What did Donald Trump do for it in exchange for the publicity, the thing of value? I don't know. Nothing. But he's Donald Trump and his hair is all over the place. So that's cool. Hunter Biden doesn't have crazy hair and doesn't paint his face orange. That's uncool. We don't like that. All right, whatever. But that wasn't really what I meant to get back to with the case of Schiff. There were a couple of great answers that he gave. Some that I thought he could even have gone further with. As I recall, there was a question put to the managers yesterday. I want you to talk about the value of the precedent here. And I disagree that there's any value to any precedent anymore about any kind, but whatever. And but Schiff was giving an answer that said, he was commenting on the weird catch-22. Weird. It's not weird. I mean, the intentional catch-22 that was being set up by the Republicans, who were saying that the House hasn't proven its case, and the Senate shouldn't have to do the House's job, and they should have subpoenaed all their witnesses, et cetera, but pointing out that in court, the president's counsel was arguing that Congress had no standing to sue in court and couldn't go to court in order to get administration witnesses to honor subpoenas. And he's actually addressing two different attacks being launched by the President's Council. One, that there was sort of the incomplete record attack, and then also the attack that the OLC guys on the President's Defense Council panel had come up with, which was that all that some of the subpoenas, the initial subpoenas, those passed prior to the adoption of House Resolution 660, the resolution formally opening impeachment inquiries in the various committees and laying out the ground rules, et cetera, that all subpoenas issued before then were invalid. And in addition, all evidence gathered under them was likewise invalid. They even had somebody submit a question yesterday. I don't remember who it was that did it, but actually submit the question using the magic phrase that they remembered from law school, fruit of the poison tree, which I thought was really inapplicable in all this. And I was hoping for a moment that Philbin would answer the question honestly and say, well, it's not fruit of the poison tree per se, but it might be considered akin to it in this sense that fruit of the poison tree really, as I always understood it, and maybe it has broader applicability, but I always understood it was it's illegally seized evidence. When the police are accused of violating the Fourth Amendment and I guess also Fifth Amendment rights of defendants by seizing property or illegally surveilling without a warrant, the evidence gathered improperly is inadmissible in court. It's the fruit of the poison tree. Even if it proves the case, that proves the guilt of the murderer, if you didn't seize the evidence properly and didn't seek a search warrant or didn't have some sort of exception that had been recognized in the past, back when precedent mattered, then you couldn't use the evidence. It's not an illegal search or an illegal seizure. They issued a subpoena and these people answered it. And I guess the argument is supposed to go, well, if the subpoena was invalid, then the testimony taken pursuant to the subpoena is invalid. But it's not entirely clear that those people wouldn't have voluntarily appeared either, unless they invited them, they declined, and then when subpoenaed, they agreed. I don't know. I'm not certain whether that is even the case. I'm not certain about the applicability of subpoenas versus search warrants and whether anyway. But they wanted very badly to bring up the specter of this fruit of the poison tree doctrine, which I thought was inapplicable. But no, Philbin jumped right in and said, absolutely, it's the fruit of the poison tree. There are two theories on the subpoenas, by the way. One, that any subpoena issued before House Resolution 660 was adopted is invalid. And also, I guess there's also some question about whether or not those subpoenas, let me clarify. There's one theory under which the evidence gathered under subpoenas issued before 660 the evidence is inapplicable to the impeachment proceedings because they were taken under rules other than the impeachment procedure rules embodied in 660. And then there's a theory that goes further, that there was no authority in the House to issue any subpoenas of any kind prior to the adoption of Resolution 660 without a vote of the full House. That's another thing. And the reminder, I think those of us who've been paying attention all along will perhaps remember that subpoena rules in the House of Representatives have changed as of late. and probably even remember from hearing the arguments why they changed and who changed them. But back in Watergate days, it was the case that even if the Judiciary Committee felt that they needed to subpoena documents either overtly in a impeachment setting or prior to their designation of their hearings as impeachment focused in the Watergate case, if you wanted to subpoena information on behalf of the House, the committee interested in taking that testimony would recommend to the full House that such a subpoena be issued, and they would have a floor vote on it. Subsequent to that, they made some rules changes, and they have changed even further ever since. But what the current rules say, this is where it's interesting. It's interesting, the overreach of the OLC in this too, for constitutional originalists anyway. The idea here is in modern practice, and this largely, I think, the current form of the House rules came about in Republicans' rush to eliminate troublesome or repetitive or annoying votes on subpoenas from the 50 billion committees that they had tasked with investigating Benghazi. I think post-Watergate, the House rules probably anticipated giving independent subpoena authority to the Judiciary Committee. That the Judiciary Committee, which conducted impeachments, the important stuff, was no longer going to have to take every one of the subpoenas that they wanted to the House floor to vote on. And I think it expanded after that to other committees as well, as the investigative role of Congress kind of expanded. Once we realized, oh my God, this is how corrupt government actually can get, Watergate, I guess we need to be looking at everything. It no longer became the case that you needed to give force to a House subpoena by having the House as a whole vote on it. There's still a check on that. Originalists say, well, if you're speaking on behalf of the House here, you ought to have the House on record at some point. Well, they say, well, when it gets serious, we'll have, gets problematic, we'll put the House on record. If you subpoena somebody, you should be able to subpoena them at the request of the committee that's interested in this. You shouldn't have to make work for the whole House to verify that that committee says they need some information. If that committee says they need the information, they need the information. If you want to punish somebody for it, you want to charge them with contempt of Congress for either refusing to show up or lying to us when they do or what have you, or conducting themselves badly when they do, then the whole House has to vote on it. But in terms of, do we think that will we designate the power? Will we, what's the word I'm looking for here? Oh, now I'm blanking out here. Delegate. Will we delegate the power of the House to its committees? All the committees, some committees? That's up to you. You make the rules. Originalists keep coming up in this, right? Each House has the power to make its own rules of proceeding. That's plenary power in the Constitution in Article 1. That's what the whole thing is about. You make your own rules. If you want the rules to be that committees can issue subpoenas, fine. They even loosened the rules even more during the Benghazi stuff when they said, now we're taking up too much committee time with the number of subpoenas we're issuing. Couldn't it just be that the chairperson, the chair of the committee, can issue subpoenas by himself, or sometimes some committees, if in agreement with the ranking member. But the ones who are doing the most investigating, they said, we want this to happen quickly. So we'll have a vote on it. And the other check on it for originalists is there's a vote in the full House to ratify those rules too. So when you bring forward a rule that says, from now on, chairs of committees can issue subpoenas by themselves, no more do we have to tie up committee time to do it. Yes, this will mean 1,000 subpoenas because it's just so easy, but if you don't like it, vote against the rules package. And, that's not really the way things work. And so we had those votes. And the whole House agreed, along party lines, that committee chairs ought to be able to do this. Now, those rules were, of course, put in place by Republicans to facilitate their Benghazi adventures. And House Democrats, ironically enough, maybe for the first time ever, said, you know what Republicans usually say when, ooh, the music went all the way up on this one. You know what Republicans usually say when they pass overbroad rules like this, or when Democrats say they're going to pass a rule like this, the Republicans say, oh yeah, what goes around comes around, and one day we'll be in the majority and we'll use this against you. So Democrats for once said, well, I'll tell you what goes around comes around. We're going to use this rule against you. As soon as we did use it against them, the OLC steps in and says, no, the House is not allowed to make its own rules because reason. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Do we continue with this? I mean, I think we've made most of the point, although I don't know if I got around to all of what Schiff was saying on this front. But he did point out, for those of us watching very directly, well, maybe not as directly as he could have, that these were House Republican rules that we were operating under, because what goes around comes around, which is the thing that Philbin, you said that just the other day, as a matter of fact. What goes around comes around. So here's what's going around coming around. Republicans threaten this all the time. Democrats very rarely do threaten it, but they do occasionally do it. And I think, actually, well, another example of that, of course, would be the nuclear/constitutional option in changing the filibuster rules. Now, they didn't go as far as they should have with changing the filibuster rules. And Republicans, just the same, projection/gaslighting, as always, in that situation, said, oh yeah, if you change the rules in 2013 on the filibuster, what goes around comes around, you know, and we'll change the rules for the Supreme Court later on when we need to do that. And, reporters, judiciously, as they will, wrote that down and studied it and said, yeah, what goes around comes around. That makes sense. Without, of course, looking at the larger picture, which you have to be older than 25, I guess, to have been alive during or politically aware. But 2013, in the use of that procedure to change the interpretation of the rules, to change filibuster precedents, just to get it technically right, that was the coming around part right there. It's not that 2000, whatever it was later on, 2017, when the Republicans took their revenge and changed the rules with respect to the Supreme Court. That wasn't the going around. It was the Republicans in 2004 and 2005 telling Democrats who were then filibustering not the Supreme Court nominations, but circuit court nominations of George W. Bush, well, if you continue to do this, we are going to use this procedure, this nuclear option, and we're going to get rid of the filibuster, and you're in the minority, and you're going to lose forever. So there. How do you like that? You'll back down now, right? And they did back down then. But at that point, nobody said, because Democrats don't say things like this, what goes around comes around. But I mean, if you believe that's true, Republicans should have known right then and there that what goes around comes around. And our threatening to use this is going to bring it back around on us. And then suddenly, and not suddenly at all, really, 8 years later, 2013, it did come around. And amazingly, Republicans took offense at this thing and said, oh, yeah, what goes around comes around. I know it does. I just watched it come around. No, but it's going to come around now. This is the beginning of it. What goes around next now comes around next time, and there was no last time, and we acknowledge nothing about it. So, I don't know. It's a weird problem that the press has. But that, I don't think, where were we with that? That was just a side story of all this. And here the rules of issuing subpoenas have gone around and come around. But the OLC argument carried forward by Philbin, there's the minor version of it and the major version of it. But they were standing there arguing that the subpoenas issued before House Resolution 660 are invalid because the House rules. They don't recognize the right of the House to delegate the power of issuing subpoenas to individual committees or to chairs of committees. But that's not up to them to decide. The Constitution is fairly clear that the House gets to make its own rules of proceeding, and maybe there was an OLC memo objecting to it during the Benghazi investigations in the Obama administration. I don't really know, but I don't recall that being the case. Then to go even further, they were also insisting that the fruit of the poison tree doctrine should apply here, and that all evidence gathered prior to the adoption of House Resolution 660 and all evidence gathered pursuant to subpoenas, whether issued before or after the adoption of House Resolution 660, all subpoenas not voted on by the full House, all evidence gathered under those subpoenas should likewise be excluded from the record, excluded from trial, by analogy to the fruit of the poison tree doctrine. And what Schiff sort of hinted at, but didn't, I don't think, actually express aloud, was they were creating a very intentional catch-22 here, and two of them at that. The first one is, well, the president's position, what's really important about it on subpoenas is that they're saying that all evidence uncovered before an impeachment inquiry resolution passes the House, 660, is invalid. Then, the part he didn't talk about is, once you do vote to impeach or pass Resolution 660 saying we're going to have an impeachment inquiry, or either mark will do. But once you finally get the House to do the thing that Philbin said was necessary in order to make the evidence gathered from that point forward valid and admissible, they'll say, what are you doing impeaching the president based on zero evidence? And you'll say, well, what the hell are you talking about, zero evidence? Well, all the evidence before this, before your resolution saying we're going to start looking in the impeachment context, is invalid, right? Well, we say no, but for the sake of argument, let's say you're right. Well, then they say, well, then what are you doing here? What do you mean? We're going to impeach the president so that we can, or begin an impeachment inquiry so that we can do things the way you said they had to be done. Yes, you are doing that, but based on what? You have no evidence that the president ought to be impeached or that an impeachment inquiry even ought to open. How dare you, without any evidence, come here and try and impeach the president? Well, what do you mean? We've gathered all this evidence, but, oh, I see what you're saying. That's invalid now. So, interesting catch-22. You can't impeach the president unless you're willing to say, yes, we are absolutely impeaching the president with zero evidence. If you will please say that on the record, then fine. We'll acknowledge that you can go forward under the Constitution. But when we get to trial, we'll just say, you have presented no evidence, which is, of course, what they're doing right now. So there's just no way to get to it. And, of course, there's the second or maybe third track in all this, in which Schiff has pointed out explicitly that, as he says, right down the street in federal court, not across the street yet in the Supreme Court, but eventually, but in federal court, in the D.C. District Court, they're arguing, as they did in the trial court, the district court below, that the Congress has no authority to make these inquiries. They just simply flatly state there might not even be subpoena power for the House as it pertains to the executive branch. Anyway, you can't subpoena anything ever from the executive branch in the impeachment context, not outside of the impeachment context. Just subpoenas don't obtain against the executive, period. And so, on the one hand, they're in the Senate saying, we don't have to convict the president no matter what you think of this evidence, because you should not regard there as being any evidence, for one thing. You can't make this decision on the evidence because there isn't any. And if there isn't any evidence, you certainly can't convict somebody without evidence, right? But they're saying at the same time, the Senate should not have to do the job of the House and gather that evidence. The House only asks you to do that, and they don't even ask you to do that, quite honestly. But the House only asks you to do that now because they refused to do it before, and they didn't even try to get it done by the regular procedure, by subpoenaing witnesses and then holding them in contempt and then going to court and trying to force them to honor the subpoena, or for the courts to declare once and for all that we in the OLC are right and there's no such thing as subpoena power as against the executive branch for anyone. Well, that's a novel. And of course, we have done that. And this is one of the other games that they like to play. We have had that litigation. And part of the reason that the House leadership knew this time that it wasn't going to be worth waiting out the litigation is because we have been through this litigation before with the last Republican president. And those who have been listening to the show or watching, writing on Daily Kos for all these years will certainly know right away that this is what we said about the Bush administration, and the way they were fighting these things is the next Republican administration is going to do the same and worse. We every time the House subpoenas executives or executive branch personnel or their documents, and there's a Democratic House subpoenaing it from a Republican administration, the Republicans defy the subpoena, force the House to sue, and it takes so long to get to a final decision. It takes the House so long to decide that they're going to risk litigation to declare you in contempt that a year will go by. And then, of course, you can fight it out in court, and a year will go by, and you can appeal that too. And the whole administration will be finished and out of office by the time the House, if it remains in Democratic hands, gets an answer from the courts that says, yup, you're entitled to that testimony, at which point, it won't matter, because what were you going to do with the testimony? You were going to put the George W. Bush administration in a bad light or even impeach them? Well, he's out of office now. What's the difference? We know, of course, you can continue with the impeachment even after that, but politically that's not likely to happen. So it wasn't the George W. Bush administration that discovered the fact that you could just run out the clock with legal maneuvering rather than comply with subpoenas at any point from anybody you didn't like them. But they were super aggressive in doing it. And we went through the courts, and it took a long time. And the courts they didn't appeal it any further, but finally appeals courts in D.C. said yes. In this case, Josh Bolton, then chief of staff, right, at the George W. Bush White House, and Harriet Miers, both, yes, you have to testify with respect to, I don't even remember, besides the U.S. attorney scandal, what else were they being subpoenaed about? But the decision came down years after the Bush administration was out of office. And we knew we were headed to that again. And we knew certainly that, as Schiff has explained, numerous times, you're heading into another election in which the president intends to cheat. So on the one hand, he'll be around when the decisions come down. But in the meantime, he'll be president, and possibly anyway, illegally at that. And you know that we don't correct that with the judicial system in this country, and we don't invalidate the things that the president or any other elected official has done, even if they were in office invalidly. Because why? Because it creates too much uncertainty. But by the way, in order to get to that point, let's throw out the applicability of all precedent at all times. All right, so fine. Stability isn't really one of our values. Anyway, we know what happens. And Schiff never even bothered, I don't think. I don't know whether he knew about it. It mostly, I think, happened before he was in office. But still, it would have been a good, a good teaching moment, I guess, for anybody who was actually paying attention. But that wouldn't include any of the Republican senators who were likely to change their vote, if there were any. But he just stayed in the context of this current impeachment and the litigation that's grown out of it, saying we've been after Don McGahn for months now, almost a full year, and we still have no decision, and they still intend to appeal. And we were reading the other day, a couple of weeks ago, about how the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which still hasn't, I don't think, rendered its decision on what the hell their answer is with regard to Don McGahn. Or maybe they did, and they're appealing it to the Supreme Court. But I know that the judges asked McGahn's counsel outright, what are you going to do if we find that you're wrong and McGahn has to testify? And it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court finds, likewise, you're wrong and McGahn has to testify. And the answer was, well, we're here challenging the subpoena under the theory of absolute immunity. And you've heard Schiff say a number of times, the president never even, why the president has never invoked executive privilege in all of this. And they're right, he hasn't. He's invoked this doctrine of absolute immunity. And McGahn has lost and is likely to lose again, if he hasn't already, before the D.C. Circuit. And the answer to the question was, well, if we lose in the Supreme Court on the question of absolute immunity, we will then assert executive privilege, at which point we expect the district court, the trial court, will have to start all over again, and the House will have to sue us and claim that our claim of executive privilege is invalid. And then if we lose in the trial court on that, we will appeal it right back here to this court, the D.C. Court of Appeals. And if we lose that, we'll appeal it to the Supreme Court, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, nobody bothered to ask, say that magically happens very quickly instead of taking 6 years to work itself out. And tomorrow, the Supreme Court of the United States says, you're also wrong on executive privilege and must testify. What will you do then? And I don't think they asked him that, but I don't know what the answer would be necessarily, but ordinarily you would think they would say, well, we're out of privileges, so yeah, we'll testify. It's now 6 years later, so who cares? Let's testify, just like Bolton and Myers did eventually when it didn't matter. Or, though, they might say, oh, well, if we lose on executive privilege, we will tell the court, we will say that Don McGahn refuses to testify on the basis of schmexecutive privilege. Schmexecutive? Well, that's crazy. There's no such thing. Well, there's no such thing as absolute immunity either, and nobody did anything about that. So, conflecutive privilege. That's crazy. Really. Well, but yeah, I agree. See, again, there's no precedent anymore, so it doesn't matter, right? You said there's no such thing as absolute immunity. And by the way, there's no analysis that's also going to help you, out of that from executive privilege either. Executive privilege, likewise, doesn't apply, especially not in the impeachment context. But that's already been decided. But see, that's just precedent. You said that Nixon wasn't allowed to do this. Right, yeah, we said, according to U.S. v. Nixon, you don't have the right to assert that executive privilege in the impeachment context trumps this subpoena. Right, I know, I read that case too. But as I recall, that case said Richard Nixon couldn't do it. And my name isn't Richard Nixon, is it? That's essentially what it comes down to. They're just going to say, that doesn't apply to me. And if you, again, here, ordinarily, it wouldn't be outlandish to say, well, okay, this privilege. Well, in that case, that privilege. But normally courts can see through this sort of sequential game and just say, let me put it to you this way. There's no privilege that survives the impeachment context. It doesn't matter if you put SCHM in front of the actual word and turn it into a nonsense word. Or say 11 billion. That's not. It doesn't matter if you invent the term. There's nothing that stands in the way of your testimony. Period. I know, but what about nothing times infinity plus one? What about that? And at some point you're not allowed to just continue to do that. But we haven't reached that point yet. So here we are. And Schiff could have made that point clearer, but then what? So then Republicans would vote for no witnesses despite another brilliant argument. So I guess at some point it's not really worth it. But I don't know. Are we creating a record? There was the real import of this whole proceeding for me, I guess, has been I always justified pursuing the impeachment on the grounds that it was a line drawing exercise at a minimum. And it might be, and it might not be. It's important to me to try, because what if in the future Republicans decide they will revert back to recognizing precedent and line drawing and the value of that. But for the moment, I guess you could throw that back in my face, right? And say, well, you said that the impeachment would at least lay down a marker that the Congress objected, that they did not do this with congressional consent, and that might work in the future because right now, when we still believe in precedent, there are court decisions out there that say that it makes a difference in certain contexts whether or not there's been objection along the way. So register the objection so you can at least point back to that. But if that also doesn't matter, well, sure, objection matters if your name is Nixon, but mine isn't, well, then maybe in that sense it's not worth doing. But, I don't know. The whole thing is kind of crazy. Like I said, it's a weird science fiction time travel loop. A lot of people discussing now, well, you can continue the investigations. In fact, you could even impeach Trump again. You could even impeach him on the same charges tomorrow if you wanted to. And all of that is true. And I advocate thinking about that. But, and set aside the politics for the moment. What the hell? What are you worried about? What are you basing your decision on? Precedent? And historically, my historical understanding of politics says that this isn't going to work. So what? Who cares? That's out the window. But yeah, a lot of consideration of, well, you can impeach him on something else, or let's keep him under investigation for the rest of his term. Why not? And indeed, why not? Politically, it seems to be working out. Go ahead. Go for it. Like one of the things you could do is you say, all right, well, the Republican objection here is that the House hasn't fully developed its case here and they should go to court and sue about it. All right, so we spend our time going back to court and sue about it. Subpoena Bolton, whatever. And then have that fight and go all the way up to the Supreme Court and win. And then they make some other cockamamie argument and invent some other excuse, and you sue about that one and you win that too. And then they do a third one, and then you say, maybe at some point in the future we would say, look, America, pay attention to the last 6 years of litigation and see how ridiculous it is that they have said, we have absolute immunity, and the court said, no, you don't. We have executive privilege, and the court said, no, you don't. We have schmexecutive privilege. No, you don't. And stop making these things up. And so here we are. Don't you think that's ridiculous? Yes. Don't you think we should never allow that going forward? Sure. And then the next Republican president calls, Shmoo Crane, a new country, and says, I'd like you to do me a favor, though. And the whole thing starts all over again. Well, that was different. That was about Trump, and that was Ukraine. And you got to, I'm going to make you prove it to me. At a minimum, they're going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, whereupon the Supreme Court will say, this is an application of the previous precedent by analogy. That's how courts work. And yes, it works, it's real, and you have to comply. Well, no, or conflicative. All right, do it again and again and again until a court says, and we're going to kill you if you don't, or you're out of the presidency if the presidency is vacant. Then they just continue to do it. So I don't know. I'm not certain. I don't want to give in to hopelessness here either. I don't know what else there is to do, because you can't go on the radio and say, well, all avenues are closed off here, and you can't vote because they're going to cheat in voting, and you can't impeach because they say you're not allowed to impeach, and you can't sue because they say you're not allowed to sue. So you're just going to have a coup and assassinate whoever you need to get it accomplished, because you don't do that. You don't say that. We don't do that, and you're in America. So I didn't just do that. I'm not even in America right now saying that. So, don't listen to me. Don't do that. I'm telling you, I'm openly advocating for you not to do that. Make no mistake. But by the way, that was one of the reasons for including the impeachment clause in the Constitution too. As they said, we would like to have a system whereby power can change hands in an orderly fashion, even if people won't use their power in an orderly fashion while they've got it. And rather than tell people, you're going to have to revert to natural law and have a revolution again, we will build in a mechanism that some people will say is overturning the results of an election. Others will disagree that it's that. But occasionally you're going to have to do that, unless, of course, you're Jeffersonian, in which case you think some blood should water the tree of liberty every once in a while. But, that was one of his more extreme thoughts, I think, and we might disagree with that one. Oh, well, we've talked our way to the end of the show. That is, I have. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it was highly philosophical, and maybe that's appropriate for today, as opposed to just sitting there and say, LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. This was a very highfalutin way of saying, LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. I should also point out another Schiff moment from yesterday that I thought was very interesting, because he thought it was so interesting. When, I don't know, was it Philbin who was answering a question, pointing out, I guess, that Rudy Giuliani was not conducting policy when he was doing all this stuff, when he was running the Ukraine game. I thought that was pretty interesting, too. And I guess they thought that was going to get them out of a certain situation, that to say that, well, what Rudy was doing wasn't official, per se, and so therefore something. But Schiff caught on to that and said, that's actually pretty interesting. If he's not conducting policy, the objection has always been, you can't impeach a president over policy differences, right? We don't want that to happen. Otherwise, we'll be impeaching presidents left and right. And therefore, don't impeach this one, or else we'll be impeaching all presidents to come. What goes around, Philbin said, comes around. That was the threat. But well, if Rudy Giuliani wasn't conducting policy, then this can't possibly be an impeachment over a policy dispute, can it? And, of course, that's true, but what are you going to do? He's studied reality judiciously, as he will, and they'll move forward and act again, and we'll study that, too. And we could go through the same damn impeachment all over again and find it works exactly the same way next time as well, even if the House litigates the subpoenas and wins. We could still find ourselves in the same place. All right, well, that's what's coming up, I guess. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a weird week. And by the way, let me also recommend to you something I didn't get a chance to play. I don't know really how. It would have been kind of awkward to just transition to this. But if you haven't seen a video I helped to try to retweet a little bit yesterday from Baratunde, Baratunde's last name. He's operating these days as Madonna, basically. Baratunde Thurston, right? Isn't that his last name? You can find him, of course, on Twitter as simply Baratunde. But if you haven't seen this video, I'll include it in the roundup. I retweeted it yesterday. I thought a brilliant play with the phrasing of Trump's call, right? Having read the transcript, Baratunde zeroes in on "do me a favor," though. and reminds us what that is really about, and also gives us something brilliant. By the way, if case you have a Republican senator who doesn't recognize the language of "do me a favor," though, as implicitly threatening, as bullying, rather than actually asking for a favor. We're just asking for a favor. You didn't have to do it, right? He explains why that's not really the case, and if they still don't get it, you just pose the same proposition to them. You know, I'm calling you about the impeachment. I want you to vote a certain way. And I'm thinking I will vote for you, or I will make a contribution to your campaign, but I want you to do me a favor, though. And that they'll understand right away. And if you ever did that in a public setting, by the way, at a fundraiser or something, I'm going to donate to your campaign, but I'd like you to do me a favor, though. They recoil because they know exactly what that means, but then they pretend they don't know what that meant in the Ukraine context. But so what? LOL, YOLO, nothing matters, / intellectual discussion about reasons why nothing matters, and that has never changed, etc., etc. So don't lose hope. I don't know. Well, at any rate, don't lose your radio tuning, because Justice Putnam comes up next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Hey, maybe there's hope elsewhere in the world. Well, he always has a good sampling of international news. How about this one? Norwegian police raided the office of an international shipping company for exporting hazardous waste. And as forests burn in the world, drinking water is at risk. Not the act of drinking water, but the drinking water itself. Find out how next.